So we're here with David Jackson, who's going to share some wonderful stories of resilience and perseverance and working really hard. We're fired up because here in the city of San Leandro, we lift up success stories and we take lessons learned from those success stories and we figure out how it is that we can do a better job as a city government by learning from others. So David, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Mayor Gonzalez. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. It's great to have you here in City Hall. So David, tell me a little bit about just growing up. Just like from the beginning, tell me a little bit about growing up.
I grew up in the 60s, or I was born in the 60s. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. My father passed away when I was 10 months old. He was a crop duster, and unfortunately he crashed his plane. But other than that, fairly normal family, Gen X, latchkey kid.
So talk to me a little bit. I've heard this expression, latchkey kid. Tell us more about that.
So my mom and her boyfriend at the time, they owned a soccer warehouse and a soccer shop, and they worked long hours. And so I would walk to school, and then I would walk home and open the door myself, thus the term, I think, latchkey kid.
There you go.
And I'd be there from, 3 o'clock, I think, if I left school on time. Maybe a little earlier if I didn't cut a few classes, but, from 3 to 6 or 3 to 7 until my mom would get home, or mom and stepdad, and so I had a little bit of time on my hands.
I well know that soccer was not, let's say, as popular as football or some other sports in the 70s. But it's kind of interesting that you were a soccer family. Tell me more about that.
So my ultimately stepfather ended up played soccer at San Jose State. And my mom met him when he was opening up his soccer shop. And they started talking, and he needed a silkscreen, a print shop. And he said, "Why don't you run that for me?" And that's how they kind of started and got in business. And so then that was the sport I played, because that's what they did.
So are you a soccer fan?
I am a soccer fan. I'm not as big a soccer fan anymore. It's kind of faded away. That was my dream, was to be a professional soccer player.
Wow.
I did play a little bit in college, but,
What position did you play?
I was a goalkeeper. Yeah.
Nice, big guy, nimble.
Yeah, well, and I hated to run. I hated running, which we'll get to.
Well, that's kind of ironic,
right?
Because I do know a little bit about your story, that the non-runner maybe changed his perspective. So tell us a little bit about just growing up. You said your father passed away. Was that impactful on your life, or was it just kind of I never knew him, so it didn't matter? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so at the time it was. My grandparents didn't really talk about him. My mom didn't talk about him a lot. I'm sure it was painful. And it also happened, I didn't really know him. I was 10 months old. And so, no, it was just kind of a forgotten thing. It was just I didn't have a dad.
And did it ever kind of become a thing for you?
Yeah, so when I was about 18, 19, when I was trying to figure out, I think, life and who I was, that's when it really started to hit me. And then I would talk to my grandmother more, and I would do something, and she would say, "Oh my God, that's just like your father." And so I started to investigate and learn a little bit more about him, I'll say.
So nature versus nurture. So that's a really deep topic, but did that cause you to wonder about nature versus nurture? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that in terms of addiction. How my addiction started. Would it have been different if I would have had a very strict father? Would that not have mattered at all, because there was, some DNA and generations above him that had addiction? So it's always on my mind, that question.
So I think, one of the things that people often want to know is, you've talked about addiction. Like, what happened? Right? Is it something like one day you just said, hey, I want to be an addict?
Exactly. No.
So talk to us a little bit. I mean, I know this can be kind of personal, but like, how do you think you ended up there?
It's a very slow and insidious process, I will say. Because I think I didn't have a dad, I would go back to Colorado in the summers. And I had a lot of uncles back there, and they were good old boys. And that was the first time I remember that I ever drank. And I was just blackout drunk, and it was horrible. And it, I don't know, triggered something in me, I think, at that point. And then from there, I would, it made me feel better. It made me feel different. So I would drink here, drink there.
When that first experience, those experiences in Colorado, how old were you at that time?
10, 11. Yeah. It's pretty young.
And did your family members normalize it? Did they laugh about it? Did you feel like one of the guys? Talk to me about what.
Kind of all of the above. Still to this day, they talk about it. Remember when you threw up at a time and got sick? So it was normalized. It was also, I was the city kid when I would go back there. And so I do remember the very next day, I was sick and supposed to go to work. And my uncle, he's like, come on, let's go. And he goes, you just stay home anyway. You're a city kid. So it was mixed feelings about it. It was kind of cool, but yet I didn't follow up and be a man after I got sick, I guess,
What about Mom? How did she react? Did she know? Did you hide it from her?
Yeah, no, Mom didn't know that one. No. Yeah, I tried to hide it as best I could. And I think, there were times, obviously, where she knew, and I would be grounded, and she would, try and do the best she could with it.
Obviously, a lot of parents fear, like, what happens when my kids start drinking or doing other substances? Having lived the experience, do you have advice for parents?
Yeah, talk to your kids. I mean, I know it's cliche, but it I don't know. For me, I needed a little bit more discipline. My mom was a little softer, and I think, because I was an only child, she wanted to give me a lot of things, and she didn't quite understand maybe the addiction. I understand it a lot better because I went through it. So yeah, the advice is talk to your kids and call them out on it.
You think your mom loved you?
I know my mom loved me deeply. She very much cares about me.
And do you think that your mom could have benefited from some other support?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Talk to me about that. What does that mean, that your mom could have benefited from some other kind of support? What would that have looked like, do you think?
Probably, well, I don't know. It was tough because I don't know how much support was available back in the 80s. But I know, talking to other parents, being involved with your kids' friends and what are they doing. I love the phrase, show me your 5 friends and I'll show you who you are. So if your kid's 5 friends are all drinkers, your kid's a drinker. And you need to not have blinders on. I think a lot of times, and I do this even still as a parent, I don't want to see it. And so I will, just as a human being, I'll see other things,
Is having a circle of adult parent friends useful? How do you handle that situation where you acknowledge, guess what, maybe I'm not being honest with myself about what my kids are doing? Are you able to tap into other parents, a network? Is it people without kids that kind of say, hey, how are you working through that?
How am I working through that?
You personally.
With my support?
Yeah.
Oh, it's huge. You have to have support. You have to find a tribe, or a crew, or whatever you want to call it. And I have a group of men that we have a support group. We used to meet a lot more than we do now, just because I'm up here and they're in the South Bay. But that was instrumental. We've been together, I think, for 10 years.
That's awesome. One thing that we've talked about, obviously, is addiction. And that transition, because it's one thing to drink. And maybe I should ask you, when you were a kid or a young adult or a grown adult, did you think of yourself as a social drinker?
Oh, very much so.
So talk to me, what does that mean, being a social drinker?
Well, yeah, so I think you go from a social drinker where you can be in settings, or you need a couple drinks to be social. But it's kind of an accepted thing with our community. You go to a party and before you have hors d'oeuvres and drinks, and so you're social there. But then that's where you leave it, right?
So clearly there was a transition in your life.
Yeah.
From social, recreational, to addiction.
Yeah. Well, there's one more step in the middle. Then
tell me about that.
You go from a social drinker to then becoming a functional drinker, or a functional alcoholic, if you are honest with yourself, where you drink, but you hold down a job, you take your kids to soccer practice, you maybe go to the PTA, and you go home, but you're not maybe there really present for your kids. You're not really doing the best job you can. But it's a great rationalization to be able to continue to drink and have all these things and say, I'm not like them, I'm functional. I'm functional. And then it gets to non-functional.
Yeah, so for people in the community who, I might say, have suspicions or concerns about their neighbor, right? A friend that they really care about, how would they spot that and how could they help? So maybe we'll start with the spot, the identification. How can they identify the functional drinkers, functional alcoholics? And then I'd like to explore a little bit, like, how can we help? Right?
Right.
How can we support?
So drinking in the morning is kind of a big tip-off for the functional drinker. If they have to get up and drink, even the bigger tip is if they have the shakes, and I mean it's really, that one's the pretty obvious. I always like to say watch behaviors, because behaviors will change. People have certain behaviors that they do, but then when they start drinking, then all of a sudden, maybe their behavior was they were never late. They always picked up their kid, right? But now they're 5 minutes late. Now they're 10 minutes late. Now I just got to call and I just got to send a real email real quick before we go. I just got to make, and then where are they? Hey, Dad, come on, we got to go. Yeah, I'll be right there. And they're in the closet or in the bedroom or the bathroom, So you start to see the slip, and the different changes in behaviors.
And so be it for parents, for neighbors, for family members, presumably to some degree, people saw that in you.
Mm-hmm.
So being on the backside of this experience, how can people help those in need at that stage?
Confronting them, easily. It can't be a, wow, you're really drinking. But it can just be a, hey, I've noticed you're a little later dropping off your kids at soccer practice. Is everything all right? Do you need help? Is there anything I can help you with? And just trying to be their friend, come from a place of care and concern, not from a place of you're doing the wrong thing, I think is key too.
Did someone play that role for you?
They did. I got a lot of chances. I wish I would have jumped on those opportunities earlier. I didn't. But yeah, I was given a lot of chances, and I was given a lot of love, and I was never thrown away.
And do you think that in the end, that's what really mattered? That people loved you?
Yeah, I do.
So we went from social, functional, and then it gets really, really, really serious. So talk to us about your progression.
All right, so I was an alcoholic. I mean, I was, I didn't admit it to myself, but I was definitely functional. I had a job, I'd been making a lot of money. I had some toys and some cars, and then I hurt my back in the gym, and I blew out a disc, and it was kind of right in the beginning of that opioid crisis, and so they were giving me prescriptions of Vicodin and benzodiazepines, and I was taking them, and that started me on that path.
Do you think that being an alcoholic already made you more susceptible? Do you have no perspective on that?
Oh, no, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It absolutely made me more susceptible. I mean, my addiction, I'll say, was kind of already in full gear. And it was just happened to be with alcohol was the current substance. And then when it changed, then it moved over to the opium substance.
So at some point, things get really bad.
Yeah. So I go to rehab, and I get a divorce, and I continue, trying to get a job. And I realize at that point that this is where the addict thinking is. I realize at that point that I have to do something different. And instead of that different being stopping, I just change drugs so that they don't know, right? Because alcohol smells, and you get DUIs, and it's messy. And I was doing the opium thing, or the pill thing, Vicodin, but I didn't really want to run that doctor game anymore, because that was starting to get, pretty tight now. And so I thought heroin is the next best thing. And I just happened to be living in a place in Santa Cruz where it was like a drive-in. You walk down, somebody, what do you need? Hands it to your hand, and you walk out. I mean, it was
that easy.
That easy. And that started me on a path of a lot of destruction and a lot of hurt.
And by that, I assume you mean not just hurting yourself, but hurting other people?
People, children, family, community, friends, neighbors. It was a big explosion.
That's a tough place to be.
It was horrible.
Self-aware?
Eventually.
Did you want to get out of this situation but were unable to get out? Felt unable, maybe I should say.
I knew the situation we were in and where it was going with what we were doing was not going to end pretty. But I didn't have a choice. I didn't feel I had a choice. You know, I didn't feel I had any way out. There was even a time where I was on this drug called Suboxone, and it was supposed to help you, or it helped you keep off of heroin completely. But I ran out of money to purchase it. And so I remember going to the ER, and they said, we can't help you because we don't have you had to have a certain medical thing to prescribe it. And they were like, we don't even have it. You have to go to certain places. And so he said, I can shoot you, give you a shot of morphine and send you on your way. And I was like, well.
That doesn't sound like help.
No, it wasn't help. It wasn't help.
Where did you find the help you needed?
Well, ultimately it was myself and some friends and the help of Narcotics Anonymous and the 12-step programs.
I hear the answer ultimately. That sounds a little bit institutional. Was there something before that occurred?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say, ultimately what got me to help was I got thrown in jail. So I was 40 years old, found myself in jail for the first time. Well, besides the DUI, that's just a 6-hour hold. I don't really call that jail. It's horrible. And I had 27 felonies hanging over my head. I was like, how in the world did I get here? And my kid was taken away and put in CPS. And it was devastating.
That wasn't your life dream, was it?
No, it was to play soccer. I never thought I would, well, if it didn't make soccer, I could always, just work out and end up in jail when I'm 40. Yeah, no, that was not the dream.
It strikes me that something very powerful had taken control of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened in jail or right after? What was the switch that flipped? The decision that got made? Tell me about that.
So I did my jail time, and we got out, and I just want to step back for a minute, because being in there really gave me a sense of other people's shoes, Especially as a runner, I can use the cliche, run a mile in my shoes. But I got to know these men and kind of where they came from and how they operated and what they thought. And it gave me a lot of sympathy. It gave me a lot of compassion, because I used to just kind of be that guy that thought, everybody's born equal and we're all the same, and you make your life's dream, and if you do bad things, you go to jail. And that's not what I believe anymore. You look at where a lot of these guys come from and their backgrounds and what happened, and I understand we all have a hard life, but when you really get to know their story, it's a whole lot different than what just gets shown on the outside, or in the newspapers. So, to go back to answer your question, I got out of jail and I kept doing dumb stuff and it was my youngest child who we had lost the CPS, and then we'd gotten him back, and it was his birthday, and I was supposed to pick up him and his sister and his other brother, and I didn't, because I was too loaded. And finally somebody was at the house and got me awake and said, "Your kids are waiting for you." And I don't know, that was, I mean, there's been a lot of bad things that have happened, but for whatever reason, that was it. And I remember sitting down and having to see all their faces, and I just knew at that point. I had been in enough recovery centers, and I had been to meetings enough, and I had, seen where my life had gone, and I just realized at that point that that's not the legacy that I wanted to leave for those kids. And that was a switch. And I called my mom and I said, "Hey, I'm going to come over and get well on your couch and turn my life around." She said, "Okay, come on over."
How old were you?
2010. So what's that? 14 years ago, minus 56, so 42. Sorry.
So even after 20 years of addiction, there's hope.
Oh. There's always hope. There's always hope and help.
In some ways, we all face some type of addiction. It's just how we channel that. Is it a constructive addiction,
Right.
a negative addiction?
Work, food.
Whatever it is. It sounds like, from what you've told me before today, that you were able to, after having made that decision, "Mom, I'm going to change starting today," that you were able to channel your focus and make a huge change in your life. Talk to us about that.
So, as I had said, I'd been in many rehabs and meetings, and I knew there was hope. Right? I knew there was a place. And I had friends in San Jose that I knew could help me. And I had to get out of, where I was in Santa Cruz. I couldn't do it, and so sometimes you gotta just change locations. And so, like I do everything with my addiction, I said, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I gotta go all in. And so I just went all in.
All in into what?
All in into recovery, all into making myself a better person, all into healing, all into being a new dad. Like, all in. This is what I was doing. When that flip gets switched, and for me, and I really believe in this, and when you can harness the power of your mind and really set your intention, you can do a lot of great things.
That's powerful. So tell me what came next.
So, I jumped in, we had our men's group. I was doing everything. I was putting my kids first. I was being humble. I was living with my mom. I was helping her, and I was enjoying my life. It was a beautiful thing. It was simple, and it was focused. and I met a girl, and we hit it off, and she's got a daughter, and we lived our life, but we made sure about our priorities, and those were and I told her, and she told me, we need to put I said I need to put my kids first, because I didn't put them first for a long time, so they're going to be, number one. And she said the same thing about her daughter, and then I ended up here in San Leandro.
You used an interesting word there. You used the word humility. And I associate humility with putting others first. And then you told me I chose to live with humility, and I put my children first. How has that changed the way you've lived your life over the last 15 years?
So the last 15, that's how I've lived my life, and I think that when you're humble, it helps you to be open, and when you're open, you can see more opportunities, and when you have more opportunities, you can grow, and when you can grow and heal yourself, then you can help others. I think it's a really good formula.
Super powerful. I was going to ask you, what advice do you have to city employees and people that are out there trying to make the world a better place, particularly in government, right? I'm the mayor of San Leandro. But I think that kind of tells the story in a nutshell. How to live a life, to be open to those possibilities. Tell me a little bit about your running, because I know you're an avid runner now.
Yep. So kind of along with the story, as you were saying, what was progressed. So I moved up here in 2019 into San Leandro, and I love the city. I love the East Bay. I love that I'm like a mile and a half from the park system and the trails. And so it was 2019. I had just finished reading David Goggins' book, You Can't Hurt Me, the Navy SEAL. And in there he talks about running these 100-mile races. And it just started with a thought. And I thought, I wonder if I can run one of those. And so that thought probably rolled around for a week or so. And then I'm like, do it. And I put on my shoes and I ran out the door and I did 3.5 miles. And I fell in love, and I was like, this is my passion. And like I said, that was my first run ever, and I hated running, right? That's what we talked about. I was the goalkeeper. And 40 years later, I guess I learned to love it. And it just became my passion. And so I ran my first race that November, and it was a 50-mile race. And it was, I gotta say, it was a magical race, because the last little bit you could have a pacer, and my son paced me, and it was cool. And I finished the race, and my knee was like this big, and my entire body hurt, and I thought, I gotta do this again. And that's what it started. And I got a coach, and she's this amazing coach. She not only, it's virtual, but she believes that there's so much more to running. And so she helps me, with mental problems and how to get through running things in life. And she's amazing. And I've been with her now for 4 years, and I just keep going. I've done 500K races.
I've
done 500Ks.
100-kilometer races.
62.2 miles for our American friends. And I did two 50 milers, a 50K, and then 500 Ks. And I completed 3 of those 5. So,
Wow.
and this year, finally, I'm going to do my 100-mile race. So I got a big race schedule planned this year.
All I can say is wow. A couple of final questions for you. This concept of perseverance. You know, when cities like ours and others, they have oftentimes big, long-term challenges to address. What advice would you give city staff here and in other cities, right, to guide them in addressing the big, long-term challenges?
So with anything, I mean, city employee or neighbor down the street, right? Anybody that makes this big goal. For me, again, ultra running is my passion, and I've taken so much. There's so much to learn from it, and incorporated it into my life. And one of the things in ultra running that we say is we run aid station to aid station, because if you look at a 50-mile race or a 100-mile race, that's way too big, right? If you look at your goals that you want to set for 4 years from now, they look pretty audacious. You got some big things you want to accomplish. So you can't just, for a lot of people, they get overwhelmed and it's too much. So don't focus on all that. Just run aid station to aid station. It's only about 6 miles. And if that gets really hard at the end of the races, when it does, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to run 6 more miles, then I just run the mile that I'm in. I just run the mile that I'm in. And I take a lot of those mantras that I use in those races and I apply them in my daily life. When today is really, really hard and I'm not sure I can get tomorrow, I'm just going to take it by an hour. I'm just going to run the next mile I'm in, next hour by hour by hour. Eventually it'll be tomorrow, and I'll made it.
So I do have one last question for
Okay.
you as we wrap up. Your story is very powerful.
Thank you.
And there are people along the way that get hurt. And then out of the backside come some wonderful things. I mean, your transformation, your rebirth, just very powerful. What about the people that were hurt along the way? Have you managed to reconnect with them?
Yes, I have. And that's is a very powerful part of the healing, is to make your amends, to the people, to reconnect. It takes a while sometimes, depending on how much damage, especially with your family or your friends that you caused. Unfortunately, those, even though we say we're only hurting ourselves, those are the ones that we end up hurting the most. And so a lot of it is listening to them and how they feel. And then it's time, just showing up, just keep showing up. Do what you say you're going to do, and so your family knows, hey, he's on the right path.
I want to take a deep breath and say thank you, David, for being here.
Thank you very
has
much.
been an honor
It's been my pleasure.
to hear your story. So thank you for sharing. And San Leandro, look forward to chatting with you again.